Welcome to the first tape on Iai, Japanese quick draw. First thing you need to become acquainted with Iai is to become acquainted with the sword itself. This is called an Iaido, which is a non-sharpened and non-sharpenable practice sword. The Iai sword, one of the common characteristics of it, is the blood groove that runs the length of the blade. This gives the Iai blade a characteristic whistle when a cut is made. Other parts of the sword that you'll want to become familiar with. First is the blade, which is known as the ha, the edge of the sword. The hilt guard, which is known as the tsuba. The handle, known as the tsuka. And the scabbard, which is known as the saya. These are the principal components of the Japanese sword. In working with the Japanese sword, there's proper etiquette to be followed with each move, each principal movement of the sword. The first thing we'll start with is how to properly bow in with the samurai sword. The first portion of the sword etiquette is the proper seating position, or seated position. This is known as seiza. This is sitting with your knees about one fist width apart, with your feet tucked under you behind, and your big toes just touching. With the sword at my side raised to my pelvis bone, the tsuba, I begin the bow by switching the sword to my right side and placing it next to me with the edge towards me and the tsuba even with my knee. This is how we bow to the front of the school, to judges, to instructors, or to a dojo deity. Then the bow is made by placing both hands simultaneously down to the mat and bowing, but never lowering your eyes. And sitting back up erect, taking the sword by the saya and the tsuba with the right hand and placing it directly in front of your right knee. Bring your left hand the length of the sword, turn the sword, blade away from you, the tsuka to your right side, go back to the seated position. Now left hand first, place your hands on the ground and bow to the sword. Once again, not dropping your eyes. Back up to the seated position. Next, I'll take my right hand and slide it underneath the saya, right behind the tsuba, holding the tsuba with my right thumb. Now take the back of the saya with my left hand and raise the sword in front of me to insert it into my obi. At this point, I'll move back and find a slot in my obi for the belt, for the sword, with my index finger. Once that's located, the sword is slid into the obi and controlled from the end of the saya with the left hand. Any adjusting that has to be done on the sword is done from this position. The next portion we'll undertake with the sword is the proper grip on the sword. The sword is held generally in the right hand. The grip is secured with these three fingers, your small finger, your ring finger, and your middle finger, on the tsuka, about a half an inch to an inch behind the tsuba. The index finger and the thumb are relaxed at this point. The second hand grips the sword primarily with the index finger and the thumb, the ring finger and the middle finger. The small finger moves freely beneath the bottom of the handle, the hilt of the sword. That is the tsuka. Now when this hand is gripped, the hand must not be turned so that the sword can come up from under the hand. That grip is incorrect. The sword must be held so that the sword goes into the hand and becomes part of the construction of the bones of the arm, since the cutting is actually done by and large with the left hand. From the right side, or from the left side of my body, the proper grip on the sword. And from the right side of the body, the proper grip on the sword. Notice that there's a 3 to 4 inch space between the hands to create a fulcrum or a turning point for the cut. After the grip is established, the next step to the use of the sword is proper drawing techniques. For the forms that we'll be doing, there will be primarily 3 different drawing techniques. The first technique is to draw horizontally, slashing the eyes or the throat of the opponent. This is done by the hands moving simultaneously towards the sword. The left hand will move to the saya, the right hand will move to the tsuka. As they come to make this draw, the left hand, using the thumb, will spring the sword loose from the saya. The right hand will take the sword, and as the saya is being pulled off the sword by the left hand, the sword is being pulled from the saya with the right hand, making a horizontal cut across the throat or the eyes of the opponent. When this is done, both arms are pulled back and the shoulder blades are pushed together in the back, flexing your back and pushing your chest forward as the cut is made. Once again. That's the first draw. The second draw is bringing the sword out in a circular motion and slashing at about a 35 to 45 degree angle across your opponent's face, stopping the tip of your sword at your opponent's jaw, the left side of their jaw. This is done by starting the draw the same way. The hands come to the sword, once again, left hand to the saya, with the thumb behind to spring the sword, right hand to the tsuka to pull the sword and continue with the opening cut. This starts as the hands come to the sword. As the sword begins to spring, the saya is turned 45 degrees by the left hand to the outside. The draw is made, circling and slashing. Once again, the shoulders are pulled back, the arms are pulled back, the sword is pulled out of the saya, but the saya is also pulled away from the sword. The third draw is drawing from the ground up with the edge of the sword inverted, drawing and cutting from your opponent's right hip up towards your opponent's left shoulder across his body. This is done by coming to the sword once again the same way, the left hand springing the sword, and as the sword is sprung, the saya rotates as the sword is being drawn. And the cut is made once again with the right hand. Stopping with the point still pointing towards your opponent's center, to the center line. Once again.